in a bustling neighborhood of Atlanta, Georgia, where culture thrived despite the daily struggles of life, a shocking event unfolded that would leave everyone stunned. The whole country was about to talk about what happened next. At the heart of this story is Keisha Daniels, a soft-spoken yet fiercely independent black woman, heavily pregnant, and her husband, Andre Daniels, a man with a calm demeanor, but a past that would change everything. On a warm, sunny afternoon, Keisha had just stepped out of a local grocery store, carefully carrying a small bag of fresh produce. She was looking forward to preparing dinner for Andre, who worked long shifts at a nearby logistics company. The day seemed ordinary until it wasn't. As she made her way across the parking lot, Officer Brad O'Reilly, notorious for his power-hungry attitude and subtle but consistent displays of racism, spotted her. He had no idea that the chain of events he was about to set in motion would end his career and forever change his life. Officer O'Reilly, a middle-aged white man with a buzz cut and a permanent scowl, had built a reputation for harassing residents of predominantly black neighborhoods. Today, Keisha would be his target. He pulled over abruptly, his cruiser screeching to a halt. "Ma'am, stop right there," he barked, stepping out of his car, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. Keisha turned, confused but calm. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice steady but wary. O'Reilly's eyes narrowed as he sneered, "Don't get smart with me. You're loitering, and we don't need any more troublemakers around here." The tension was palpable. Keisha, feeling her unborn child kick in her belly, took a deep breath. "Officer, I just finished shopping. I'm not loitering. I'm heading home." Her explanation wasn't enough for O'Reilly. His face turned red with frustration as he stomped toward her. "I said stop arguing," he shouted, shoving her backward. Keisha stumbled, clutching her stomach in fear. Then, something unimaginable happened. O'Reilly lashed out in his rage, kicking Keisha hard in the abdomen. She crumpled to the ground, crying out in pain. Bystanders, stunned, screamed in shock. Some took out their phones and began recording. The incident quickly went viral. Videos flooded social media, and hashtags like #JusticeForKeisha and #StopPoliceViolence spread across the nation. Keisha was rushed to Grady Memorial Hospital, where doctors worked tirelessly to ensure both she and her baby were safe. Andre, who had been at work when the news broke, rushed to the hospital, his face etched with fear. "Keisha, baby, are you okay?" Andre asked, tears streaming down his face as he held her hand tightly. She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I'm fine, but Andre, he kicked me," she whispered, her voice cracking. Andre's calm demeanor cracked as well. His hands clenched into fists and his jaw tightened, but he knew he couldn't let his anger take control. "We're going to make him pay," Andre said, his tone cold and determined. Andre Daniels wasn't just a logistics worker. He was a former Marine with extensive training in strategic operations and experience in law enforcement oversight. His quiet nature often hid a sharp intellect and an unwavering sense of justice. He spent the night watching every second of footage, calling old friends from his military days, some of whom had become influential attorneys and activists. The next morning, Andre held a press conference outside the hospital, flanked by civil rights leaders and attorneys. He addressed the growing crowd of reporters, his voice strong but full of emotion. "My wife and unborn child were attacked by someone sworn to protect and serve," he began, his voice unwavering. "We will not rest until justice is served." The press conference only fueled the fire. Protests erupted across Atlanta, with crowds gathering outside the police precinct where O'Reilly worked. Meanwhile, Andre worked behind the scenes, gathering evidence and preparing a lawsuit that would not only target Officer O'Reilly, but also expose the systemic issues plaguing the Atlanta Police Department. 3 days later, Andre confronted O'Reilly, but not with the violence anyone might have expected. Instead, Andre, flanked by his legal team, arrived at the precinct with a court order demanding O'Reilly's immediate suspension. Caught off guard, O'Reilly tried to play it cool. "You're making a big mistake," he sneered as he was escorted out by internal affairs officers. Andre's expression was unyielding. "The only mistake was you thinking you could get away with this," he shot back. As the legal case gained traction, shocking revelations about O'Reilly's past began to surface. There had been multiple complaints of excessive force and racial profiling, cases that had been swept under the rug for years. Andre and his team worked tirelessly to bring these cases to light, turning the trial into a landmark moment for police accountability. In court, Keisha took the stand, her testimony raw and moving. "I was just trying to go home," she said, her voice trembling. "He saw me as less than human because of the color of my skin, but I refused to let him take away my dignity or my baby's future." Her words moved the jury, and tears were seen on many faces in the courtroom. The trial ended with Officer O'Reilly's conviction on charges of assault and misconduct. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison and stripped of his badge. The Daniels family also won a substantial settlement from the city, which they pledged to use to support community programs addressing police violence. But the story did not end there. Andre's leadership during the crisis earned him national recognition, and he was invited to join a task force on police reform. Keisha, inspired by Andre's resilience, became an advocate for maternal health and racial justice. The Daniels family turned their pain into purpose, proving that even in the face of injustice, strength and unity could create lasting change. As for Officer O'Reilly, he would spend the rest of his life regretting the moment he underestimated Keisha and Andre Daniels. When you push someone down, you never know who will rise up to fight back, and how far they'll go to make sure you pay. The courtroom was filled with tension as the judge prepared to deliver the final sentence. Andre and Keisha sat side by side, their fingers intertwined, projecting a quiet strength. The media frenzy surrounding the case had reached a fever pitch, with millions watching the live stream. Justice had been served, but fate had one more twist in store. As the judge pronounced Officer O'Reilly guilty of all charges, a murmur rippled through the courtroom. The sentence was harsher than anyone had anticipated. Not only would O'Reilly serve 15 years in prison, but the court also ruled that he would forfeit his pension and assets to cover additional damages to the Daniels family. The courtroom erupted in applause. Keisha let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, and Andre placed a protective hand on her belly. But then, the doors to the courtroom flew open. A man in a crisp black suit strode in, his presence commanding immediate attention. It was Anthony Caldwell, the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, known for uncovering large-scale corruption. He held up a thick folder as he approached the judge. "Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption, but new evidence has come to light regarding Officer O'Reilly and his department," Caldwell said, his voice clear and authoritative. "Over the past 6 months, my team has uncovered a network of illegal activities within the Atlanta Police Department, including bribery, falsified reports, and targeted harassment of minority communities. At the center of it all is Officer Brad O'Reilly." Gasps filled the room. O'Reilly's face turned ashen, and he began to protest, but Caldwell silenced him with a pointed glare. "I'm not finished. Based on this evidence, federal charges will be filed against O'Reilly and others in the department. Today, we're not just delivering justice for the Daniels family. We're taking the first step toward dismantling a corrupt system." Outside the courthouse, the energy was electric. Protesters cheered, chanting Keisha's and Andre's names as the couple emerged. Keisha stood tall, her baby bump visible beneath her flowing dress, her face glowing with hope. Andre stepped forward to address the crowd. "This is bigger than us. he said, his voice steady. Today, we didn't just hold one man accountable. We sent a message to everyone who abuses their power. Change is possible, but it requires all of us to stand together. Suddenly, Keisha gasped, clutching Andre's arm. Andre, I think it's time, she whispered. Hours later, in the delivery room, Keisha gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Andre held her hand tightly as they both cried tears of joy. The baby's cries filled the room, a sound that symbolized hope and renewal. They named him Justice, a tribute to the fight they had endured and the brighter future they now envisioned. News of the baby's birth spread quickly across the nation. People celebrated the Daniels family's resilience, and donations poured into the community programs they had established. The couple became symbols of hope for families fighting against injustice. A year later, Andre and Keisha stood on a stage at the grand opening of the Daniels Center for Justice and Equality, a nonprofit organization dedicated to police reform and racial equity. With baby Justice in her arms, Keisha addressed the crowd, her voice filled with emotion. We turned our pain into purpose, and now we're building a better future, not just for our son, but for everyone's children. The crowd erupted into applause. Andre leaned in to kiss his wife and their son. Together, they had faced unimaginable hardship and emerged stronger, proving to the world that even in the darkest moments, love and determination could light the way. And somewhere in a cold prison cell, Brad O'Reilly sat alone, watching the celebration on a tiny TV, knowing he would never escape the shadow of his own hatred.